This morning we're going to continue in our series that we've been talking about each month, about striving for greater faithfulness in 2023. The subject of faithfulness as Christians should mean everything to us because it is the means by which we continue to share in fellowship with our God and with our brothers and sisters in Christ. Last month we talked about the faithfulness of God. We stopped to think about how we serve a God who has been true and faithful to us. He has made promises that He has kept over the process of time, and He's honorable and trustworthy, which means that we should be responding in faithfulness to His call, to His church, and to His mission. This morning, for a few minutes, I want to talk about faithfulness to the church. In thinking about our relationship to the local church here at Fry Road, and to the degree to which we can aspire to greater faithfulness, greater trustworthiness, greater dependability on one another in life and in faith. How can we become increasingly faithful? There's any number of actions that we can take, and I hope that today will give us an opportunity to refocus our hearts and our minds on our faithfulness to the local church in thinking about what we can do to make it stronger, to make it better, to make it more united in love for our God. First of all, and this is very simply put, it's interesting how the simple things can often be overlooked and taken for granted. I suppose a good starting place in thinking about how we can aspire to greater faithfulness to the local church is to simply attend faithfully. To attend faithfully. You being here makes a tremendous impression to the group as a whole. And when you're not here, you make a tremendous impression to the group as a whole. Over the course of the year, in the course of a given year, we have 52 weeks in a year and we have three assemblies a week. That's 156 times that we gather. I know we live in a world that where we take pride in analytics and we keep track of things and the numbers mean a lot to us. That's a number for you, 156 assemblies. And what's your percentage for your attendance, your faithfulness to attend? I don't attend all the time. There have been times where haven't been able to be here. So don't think that I'm standing here thinking that I attend every time the doors are open. That's my goal. That's what I try to do. That's what I try to help accomplish in my family. Do you attend faithfully as you could, as you should? In Hebrews chapter 10 and verses 23 to 25, you have, again, an example of a church where things are starting to fall apart. And the relationships are beginning to drift away from the Lord and away from one another. And the writer's trying to bring them back together. To cause them to aspire to greater faithfulness. And he says to hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering. You made a confession. Every one of you have made a confession. You made it before God. A confession which really, if you want to get down to it, is a vow. You've made a vow of faithfulness. So hold to it without wavering. Unfaithfulness is where the wavering begins to take place. And if we're not thoughtful, we just fall away entirely. It says, for He who promised is faithful. God is faithful. Unquestionably. And that has been proven time and again. That's not always the case with you and I. So let's consider how to stir one another up to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Our assemblies are absolutely vital to our spiritual life absolutely vital to our spiritual life. It is the means by which we offer our worship to God, strengthening our relationship with Him and to one another. The things that we do here are done in part to edify. To edify. The word edify is a word that is almost exclusively used in terms of spiritual life. Edification is the process by which spiritual growth is promoted. How do you do that? Well, by being here. By coming together with people of a like precious faith. People that you share a hope with. To try to build them up. To prevent one another from falling. Building on this idea of attending, as it's even presented here in this passage, secondly, growing in our faithfulness to the local church is about encouraging. About encouraging. That's part of what Hebrews 10 is about. Stirring one another up to love and good works. We live in a fallen world, a world where sin is prevalent. A world of temptation, a world of distraction, a world where the devil, through other people and forces, is making a concerted effort to discourage us, to hinder us, to destroy us. We need to find people who sincerely love us for who we are and the commitment that we've made, and who have our best interest in mind, and build them up. That's what the local church is about. That's what we must be about here at Fry Road. In Colossians chapter 4, Paul makes some statements. Maybe this isn't the passage that would come to mind in terms of making a point about encouraging one another. But notice what he says here about some other Christians. Tychus will tell you all about my activities. He is a beloved brother and faithful minister and fellow servant of the Lord. I don't know that you'll find higher praise in the Scriptures than that. A beloved brother, faithful minister, fellow servant in the Lord. You see, that man, he was faithful. And that faithfulness was demonstrated not so much in the things that he was saying, but in the things that he was doing. I've sent him to you for this very purpose, that you may know how we are, and that he may encourage your hearts. And with him, Onesimus, our faithful and beloved brother, who's one of you. They will tell you of everything that has taken place here. They'd been with Paul. They're going to let the people there know about what's been going on in his life and what his situation is, and trying to encourage them in life and in faith. Do you want to be like Tychus and Onesimus? I hope that you do. I hope that you do. And this lesson is primarily designed to highlight how we can accomplish that. We can encourage one another, seeking the best in one another. Are you an encourager? Is that how you're known? Is that your reputation? We all have a reputation, you know. Sadly, sometimes we're known for all of the wrong things, for all of the wrong reasons. There's no greater reputation that you can have as a Christian than to be known as one who encouraged, one who built up rather than tore down. It seems to be part of our culture, really, that people take great pride in tearing down. It's easy to tear things down, you know. You ever see one of these big apartment building or something, some big tall high rise, and it's going to be demolished? You ever seen that? It's kind of neat to see something like that get demolished. It's been lined with explosives, and they push a button. In just a few seconds, that 50-story high rise is leveled. How long did it take to build something like that? Oh, it took I wondered, you know, if somebody who was a construction worker at one of these places saw the building demolished that they had spent time building up. It takes a lot of commitment, a lot of hard work, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of expense to build anything. Tear it down, you can do it real quick, real easy. Doesn't require very much thought at all. The consequences are harmful, though, aren't they? I'd rather be known like Tychus and Onesimus, or like Barnabas, who was known, it was named, given a name, because of his encouragement to his brothers and sisters in Christ. They can encourage. You want to aspire to greater faithfulness in this local church? You could pray. Do you pray for the church here? Now, usually something is prayed about our work here when we assemble. I mean, are you praying for the work of this local church privately? You praying for the stability and the growth of Fry Road? Maybe you're sitting here and you think, I never really thought of that before. Do you believe that prayer is effectual? Prayer is described that way by James. If you believe that it's effectual, then you should be praying for this congregation, for its needs, for the promotion of its goal as we seek to take the gospel to the lost. In 1 Samuel chapter 12 and verse 23, it's an interesting statement here out of the Old Testament. The context of it is that Israel had gone to Samuel, you remember, and just make these demands that, give us a king so we can be like the world. There's a big problem with that, Two problems. Number one, Israel already had a king. And number two, Israel wasn't supposed to be like the rest of the world. And that's what they wanted. Well, there's a whole series of events that take place, and God's going to give them what they demand. There seems to be a realization of their problem, their sin here, and they're talking to Samuel about that. And Samuel says to them, "Moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you. I will instruct you in the good and the right way." Well, they're going to get a king, but the question really is, is God still going to be our king? We've rebelled. Samuel's saying, no, God's still king, and you're still his people. What dedication do you have displayed by Samuel? I can't imagine how frustrated Samuel must have been. Now, you can look at some of the leaders of Israel over the course of time, and there's times where they got frustrated. But yet here Samuel is saying, I will not stop praying for you. Why does he say that? Well, Samuel loved the people that he served. He loved the people that he served. Do you love the people that you serve? Of course you do. Well, then pray for them without ceasing. Make your brothers and sisters part of your pleas and petitions to God. That you seek their strength and encouragement. That you seek that they grow. That you seek their comfort. That you seek that they grow in their work in the Lord. Fourthly, in thinking about how we can aspire to greater faithfulness in the local church, we have to show patience. We have to show patience in our work. We have to have patience with one another. And that's especially difficult because there are all kinds of pressures that we're under in our lives personally and in our work collectively, and those pressures have a way of sometimes bringing out the worst in us. Patience is not a word I would use to describe what we've seen in the last couple of years in our world. We've grown tired of one another. And people seem to be acting, especially in the last few years, acting in the interest of themselves. We have to show patience. And the Bible makes this point in a lot of different places. How can you bring a group of people together and have them really be together, not just under one roof? Sometimes we think as long as everybody's just under one roof, that means that we're one, that we're united. And that's a good starting point. That's a good starting point. You know, when Paul writes to the saints at Rome, one of the things that is interesting is he writes about unity, peace, and harmony. It doesn't seem to be, though, that among the saints in Rome that there is some open hostility among them. So you'd say, well, why would he write about unity if it doesn't seem to be that there's an open hostility among them? Well, sometimes the worst kind of division we experience is subtle. It's quiet. Condescension can be quiet. Disregard and disrespect and disunity can be quiet sometimes. Creates tension in a group, you know. Sometimes you say, like, you can feel tension, isn't it? You know, and we have to learn patience. True patience that flows from a heart of love for our brothers and sisters in Christ that puts the interest of others ahead of ourselves, even as we discussed last Sunday morning. But in Colossians 3 and verses 12 to 14, Paul says some things here that really describe the kind of dynamic that we have to cultivate in the local church. Otherwise, things fall apart. He says to put on as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, and if any has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all these things, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. We get down to verse 14, and we cherish verse 14. How love binds everything together in perfect unity. We value that highly, as we should. But the question is, are we willing to do what is required so that love might bind together everything in perfect harmony? Well, what are the things that we have to do? You have to do what he says in verses 12 and 13. Compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, patience, forbearance, forgiveness. All of those attitudes and actions that we find to be the most challenging to do. Love is a lot of things. Love is challenging, to be sure. It challenges us to look inwardly. And adjust our hearts accordingly to the changes that need to be made so that we can do the things that will help bind us together in love in perfect harmony. So we have to show patience with one another. Then lastly this morning, in thinking about how we can aspire to greater faithfulness to the local church, volunteer. Volunteer. The local church is a voluntary endeavor. Everything about our relationship with God is voluntary. God has said, here's my son, and you can do with him what you choose. Here's my church. We're stewards of his church. And we can look at what the purpose of the church is. We can look at the kinds of activities that we're supposed to be engaged in. And all of that is needful and important. But none of it means anything if we are not willing to volunteer to serve. And service is absolutely self-giving, sacrificial. Sacrifice our time. We have to rearrange our schedules to serve, to volunteer. In 1 Corinthians chapter 16 and verses 15 and 16, Paul says, "Now I urge you, brothers, you know that the household of Stephanas were the first converts in Achaia, and that they have devoted themselves to the servants of the saints. Be subject to such as these, and to every fellow worker and laborer." The first converts in Achaia, this household here, he says they had devoted themselves to the servants of the saints. Devotion. Devotion is a quality, an identifying trait of faithfulness. Where did they learn that? The first converts. Where did they learn to do that? Where did they learn to be like that? Where did they learn to think like that? They learned that in Christ. They learned that in Christ. Christ was devoted to us sacrificially. And if we claim to be the people of Christ, well, then we likewise must be devoted to serving one another, to volunteer in the local church. That's how the church functions. When the church doesn't function like it should, there's probably an indication that its members are not working as they should. They're not volunteering as they should. They're busy with other things. And in being busy in other things, leaving off things of first importance. So if you want the work here to thrive, then be sure to volunteer. Many of you do, and you are to be commended for it. We started a new quarter here today, and if you're going to teach a Bible class, you're volunteering. You're devoting time and energy. It's often thankless. Thank you for doing that, for teaching. Service that is self-giving is rendered without the expectation of thanks, without the expectation of repayment. That's not to encourage ingratitude. It's to point out that that's how Christ has served us, without the expectation of receiving anything in return. So volunteer. Volunteer so that the church might thrive and grow, be strengthened and encouraged. All of us need to look to ourselves and think in very clear, methodical ways about how we can become more faithful to the local church. Thank you for your attention this morning. Maybe you can add a couple of points to the list that we've made here this morning. And then in making the list, do something about it. Take action. If there's someone here this morning who is not in a faithful relationship with God or with His people, with His church, you have an opportunity to change that today. You can obey the gospel and can be brought into God's family. If you've done that, but you've become unfaithful, you've turned away from the Lord and His people, then I would encourage you to come back home. If we can help you be saved today, please come forward and make your request known as together we stand and sing.